On the exact day I turned 18, my two older sisters brought a random 7-year-old boy into our home. My oldest sister actually slapped me straight across the face for his sake, while my second sister coldly told me to never step foot in that house again. I didn't even argue. I just packed my bags, picked up my luggage, and walked right out the door. They totally thought I was just throwing some childish tantrum and storming off for a few days. They figured I'd come crawling back once I cooled off. So, they happily took their new golden child on a luxurious trip abroad. They flew all the way to Norway to see the Northern Lights, the one place in the world I had always begged to visit. It wasn't until weeks later that they finally realized the truth. I had enlisted in a strictly classified 10-year medical research program. That night, their perfect little world completely shattered. Ironically, the day I booked my one-way ticket out of their lives just happened to fall on the Lantern Festival. My mentor walked me out of the Research Institute's main gates, warmly reminding me that I'd be leaving for good in exactly 7 days. He told me to say a proper goodbye to anyone I still cared about. I just stood there on that freezing street corner for a really long time. In the end, I pulled out my phone and dialed my second sister, Rachel. After all, we had been siblings for over 20 years. No matter how toxic things had gotten between us lately, I figured we should at least share one final meal together before I vanished. But she brutally hung up on me several times in a row. Eventually, her phone went straight to voicemail. She had turned it off completely. Swallowing my absolute last ounce of pride, I dialed my oldest sister, Victoria. After a painfully long and agonizing wait, she finally picked up, sounding like she was doing me some massive favor. Knowing how quickly she lost her temper, I instinctively rushed my words. "Today's the Lantern Festival. Could you maybe come home so we can all have dinner together?" Remembering that our nanny had already gone home for the holidays, I cautiously added another desperate plea. "I'll even cook the sweet rice balls myself. I'll make that strawberry filling. Leo really likes that, right?" Leo, of course, was the precious little boy my sisters had randomly adopted. Her voice on the other end was ice-cold and dripping with venom. "Leo, thanks to your little stunt, hasn't even been discharged from the hospital yet. Where do you even get the nerve to talk about celebrating some stupid festival?" I bit my lip, forcing myself to ignore the absolute disgust in her tone. "Then, can I just cook them and bring them over to the hospital? So we can eat together?" I had literally never demeaned myself like this before. Ever since Leo entered the picture, I had been in a non-stop, bitter war with Victoria and Rachel for years. Even during our absolute most explosive fights, I had never once backed down. But this time, this was my final goodbye. Honestly, no one knew if we'd ever see each other again. She went completely silent. After a suffocating pause, it was actually Leo's high-pitched, childish voice that broke the tension. "Big Brother's strawberry rice balls are super yummy." I instantly jumped on it. "Then I'll make them and bring them right over." Terrified Victoria would open her mouth and reject me again, I practically slammed the end call button. Standing there holding my dead phone, the biting winter wind suddenly made my eyes sting with unshed tears. I sprinted to buy ingredients on the way home, frantically whipping up the dessert, packing it into thermal containers, and racing straight to the hospital ward. Inside the VIP hospital room, there was only one tiny dining table. It was barely big enough to seat 3 people, even if they squeezed tight. Victoria shot me a dark glare. But before she could even spit out a toxic comment, I silently grabbed my small bowl and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window to eat entirely by myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her visibly freeze. But the shock only lasted a split second. Without missing a beat, she turned her back to me, fawning over Leo, serving him soup and spoon-feeding him. Right beside the hospital bed, Rachel was fluffing up a pillow, carefully tucking it behind the little prince's back. Leo, being a kid obsessed with sugar, greedily stuffed several of my strawberry rice balls into his mouth one after another. Trying to swallow them all at once, he broke into a weak little coughing fit. Out of sheer habit, I couldn't help but turn my head to check on him, only to see Rachel desperately patting his back in a panic, while Victoria leaped up to pour him a glass of warm water. They cooed at him, fake scolding in the sweetest voices. "Eat slower, sweetheart. Who's gonna steal it from you? It was a painfully familiar scene. Except, the spot where Leo was sitting right now, that used to be my spot. I completely spaced out, totally forgetting to look away. It wasn't until Victoria finished handing him the water that she noticed me staring. She felt my gaze and snapped her head up. A millisecond ago, Her eyes had been overflowing with tender love. The instant they met mine, they turned as cold as a blizzard. Honestly, that look shattered my heart. I quickly dropped my head, hiding my face while silently shoving another rice ball into my mouth. The thick, sweet filling caught in my dry throat, and I started choking, coughing uncontrollably against my wrist. Victoria stared at me with dead, empty eyes. "What? Do you want me to pour you a glass of water, too?" My chest violently seized up. Humiliated, I forcibly swallowed the rough urge to keep coughing. Right behind me, the room instantly went back to their disgustingly warm, picture-perfect little family dynamic. Just the three of them. Leo munched away happily and piped up in his soft voice. "Oh, in class last week, we learned about the aurora. My teacher said you can see the pretty lights in Norway during the winter. When I grow up, I totally want to go see it too." Victoria lovingly stroked his hair. "Why wait until you're grown up, baby? If you pack some extra warm clothes, we can all go see it this year." Rachel happily chimed in too, completely replacing me. "Since it's the end of the year and both your big sister and I have some time off, taking you on this trip will be a sweet little getaway for all of us." My hands trembled, nearly dropping the rice balls right onto the floor. They kept chatting away, and in less than 30 minutes, they had their flight tickets booked. Leo cheered, practically throwing himself into Victoria and Rachel's arms with absolute joy. After a while, as if he suddenly remembered I was even in the room, he tilted his head and asked, "Brother, are you coming with us?" Knowing my own departure was closing in, I figured this was the right time to tell my sisters. I took a breath and said, "No. In a few days, I have to go far away with Professor Deng." Victoria impatiently cut me off. "You don't need to bother us with these things." The words on the tip of my tongue that I might never come back were forced right back down my throat. Victoria suddenly remembered something and shot me a cold look. "Leo is getting discharged tomorrow. Since he got hurt because of you, it's not convenient for him to stay outside. I'm having the housekeeper tidy up a guest room for him." Before she could even finish, I spoke up. "I'll clear out the master bedroom for him." Victoria stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at me for a long moment like she'd misheard me, pure disbelief flashing in her eyes. "What?" After a brief moment of shock, Rachel frowned, clearly thinking I was just throwing a childish tantrum. Her tone dripped with impatience. "You don't need to act like this. We all know how petty you get. Once Leo recovers, he can move back out." I just looked at them, dead serious. "Let him have it. He's young and needs to be taken care of. It's a hassle for you two to keep running back and forth anyway. Besides, I haven't really lived at home much these past few years. The master bedroom suits him a lot better." With a loud crash, Victoria slammed the food container onto the coffee table. The sudden noise made my voice trail right off. Her expression turned grim, totally convinced I was just putting on some kind of guilt trip act. Full and happy, Leo let out a yawn and whined for Victoria to read him a bedtime story while Rachel cleared the table. Victoria gently helped Leo lie back on the hospital bed, grabbed a book, and sat right by his side to read. Just like she had done countless times over the years. Once again, I was nothing but an awkward, completely redundant outsider. I stood up and grabbed my bag from the chair. When I spoke, my throat tightened with a dull ache. "I'm heading out." Nobody responded. Rachel just calmly wiped the table, while Victoria kept reading in that soft, gentle voice of hers. I walked toward the door, passing right by Victoria's side. Her eyes never left the page. With her head lowered, I couldn't even see her expression. As I stepped out of that hospital room, the very last thing I heard was the sound of her reading aloud, and so, the prince was driven out of his very own home. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Years ago, when our parents were brutally taken from us in a raging fire, Victoria had held me so tight, her eyes bloodshot with tears. In that exact same gentle tone, she had soothingly told me through a trembling voice that my big sister and second sister were still here. And as long as his sisters were around, little Ethan would always have a home. What a bunch of liars. The bridge of my nose suddenly burned with unshed tears. I rushed back to the university overnight, heading straight into the lab to wrap up the rest of my experiment. There were only 7 days left. In these 7 days, absolutely everything tying me to this city, my studies, my miserable personal life had to be wrapped up completely. After working practically all night long, I grabbed a quick nap in the morning and finally headed home. I needed to clear out the master bedroom for Leo. As the nanny helped me move my things into the guest room, she angrily complained on my behalf. How could the real master of the house be shoved into a guest room while an outsider gets the master suite? I just packed my books and clothes into my suitcase and replied softly, "It's fine. I won't be sticking around much longer anyway." Out of nowhere, a voice dripping with deep suspicion rang out behind me. "And just where do you think you're going?" I turned around and saw Victoria standing right there. I hadn't even noticed her walk in. Her face was ice cold, her gaze locked onto my freshly packed suitcase. Rachel was leaning against the bedroom doorframe, glaring at me with the exact same frigid expression. Leo, who had tagged along behind them, was secretly eyeing my bags. He was still a kid, after all. He couldn't quite hide that greedy anticipation in his eyes. For a split second, I actually wanted to tell them the truth. But then Victoria's impatient voice echoed in my head. "You don't need to bother us with these things." Just like that. Whatever courage I had completely vanished. That way, when the day finally came for me to leave, I could at least lie to myself. I could pretend they just didn't know I was going, instead of facing the harsh truth that they simply didn't care. I shoved my hands deep into my jacket pockets, clenching my fists until my knuckles throbbed with pure agony. Faking a cool, nonchalant vibe, I muttered, I'm just moving my stuff to another room." We'd already agreed to hand the master bedroom over to Leo. Victoria's cold expression softened for a split second, but her tone quickly turned venomous again. "Leo won't be staying in that room. It's only been a few days since you violently pushed him down the stairs. Do you honestly think we'd feel safe letting him live under the exact same roof as a monster like you?" Without missing a beat, I shot back, "Fine. Then I'll move to the school dorms." Victoria's face, which had just barely relaxed, instantly twisted into pure, dark fury. I swear, I really hadn't meant to talk back to her. I just wanted to make a clean break without causing a massive scene before I left for good. Cue Leo, turning on the waterworks with his pathetic, innocent act. "But this is your room, Ethan. I really shouldn't stay here." I just looked at him and said quietly, "Don't worry about it. Once I move out of this house, I'm never coming back." A smug little smirk instantly tugged at the corners of Leo's mouth. But, catching himself slipping up, he quickly ducked his head, playing the guilt-ridden victim to absolute perfection. Victoria barked out, absolutely furious, "Who the hell do you think you're threatening?" Rachel chimed in with a nasty sneer, "If you want to pack up and move out, then just do it. It's not like anyone here is going to get on their knees and beg you to stay." I didn't utter another single word. I just turned around and finished packing up the very last of my luggage. After living in this suffocating house for over 20 years, there were just way too many memories, and far too many things I had to leave behind. I couldn't possibly drag everything with me. So, I only grabbed the absolute essentials and the precious heirlooms my parents had left me before they passed away, cramming it all into 2 stuffed suitcases. The second I pushed those heavy suitcases out the bedroom door, Victoria's shrill, furious voice echoed right through my skull. "If you have even an ounce of backbone, then don't you ever dare come back." I gritted my teeth, painfully lugging the massive suitcases down the stairs. And just as I stepped through the front entryway, her voice whipped at my back again, dripping with pure, toxic sarcasm. "Honestly, after you throwing pathetic tantrums for so many years, this will actually give us all some much-needed peace and quiet. Just don't come crawling back home on your knees in less than 3 days." I was about to grab an umbrella, but hearing those words, a tight, suffocating lump formed in my throat. "Screw the umbrella!" I pushed open the door and walked straight out into the freezing, torrential rain. The relentless downpour was absolutely brutal, soaking me straight to the bone in a matter of seconds. As I trudged out of the front yard, the heavy rain completely blurred my vision. I could still hear Victoria screaming from the porch. "From this day forward, if anyone dares to open the door for him, you can get the hell out right along with him." My eyes were stinging so intensely, I could barely even keep them open. And for a fleeting, pathetic moment, I couldn't even tell if my face was covered in rain or my own bitter tears. A dark, ominous red stain began seeping right through the sleeve of my soaked jacket. The scabbed wound on my arm must have ripped right open when I was hauling those heavy suitcases down the stairs. But the crazy part? I didn't feel a single ounce of pain, just a cold, completely hollow numbness spreading through my entire body. I mindlessly dragged my bags toward the exit of the upscale residential estate. I wasn't even sure if the university dorms would be locked at an hour like this. Honestly, I had absolutely no clue where the hell I was even walking to. Suddenly, Leo came sprinting out after me, grossly exaggerating his fake, teary voice as he wailed, "Ethan! Wait, Ethan!" Right on cue, Victoria's frantic voice screamed out to stop him. "Leo, stop! Don't you know what kind of hellish storm you're running into? What if you catch a horrible cold out in this rain? For one stupid, pathetic split second, I actually thought she was calling out to check on me. In that momentary, foolish daze, I faintly heard her next command. She was yelling at Rachel to have the nanny brew some warm ginger tea for Leo. The corners of my mouth twitched. I desperately wanted to laugh at the sheer irony of it all, but the smile simply refused to come. Maybe it was because I'd stayed up almost all night, only to rush back at dawn to pack up my entire life. Combined with the freezing downpour, my vision suddenly faded to pitch black. Just as my exhausted body was about to completely give out and hit the pavement, a firm, reassuring hand suddenly grabbed hold of me. And in a flash, the freezing rain pounding against my head completely vanished. Fighting through the dizzy spell, I forced my heavy eyes open. After a long, blurry moment, I realized exactly who it was. Megumi, the top senior from my university department, her sleek car parked right there in the pouring rain. Without even taking no for an answer, she snatched the heavy luggage right out of my hands and forcefully shoved it all into her trunk. Victoria's venomous sneer suddenly cut through the rain behind me. Wow, leaving so decisively? Turns out you had a rich sugar mommy backing you up this whole time. She had literally followed me out into the storm just to gloat and mock my absolute misery. Megumi took one look at my battered, wretched, bleeding state. Her voice shook with absolute rage as she stepped up to bat for me. Why do you even acknowledge toxic sisters like them anymore? He's leaving in a few days anyway, she shouted. Megumi, don't. I frantically tried to interrupt her in a blind panic. But she was already speaking loudly enough for Victoria to hear everything. Ignoring my warning, she yanked the passenger door open and forcefully shoved me into the warm car. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Victoria's smug face instantly drop. Megumi, what is the meaning of this? Victoria demanded. But Megumi just shot her a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. What's the meaning? Megumi scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. Oh, won't you find out for yourself in just a few days? My heart instantly leaped straight into my throat. Completely thrown off guard, Victoria stood frozen in the pouring rain, staring blankly at us for a long, pathetic moment. It wasn't until the engine roared to life that she finally panicked, lunging forward to rip my car door open. But Megumi was already behind the wheel, slamming the lock shut in a heartbeat. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could barely make out the shape of Victoria's mouth moving. Ethan, she was yelling, get out of the damn car! Her face was twisted in absolute fury, but buried underneath it, there was this flash of something else, something desperate. I didn't get it, and honestly, I didn't care. Because as of today, me walking away meant absolutely nothing to her, or to Rachel. I just shut my eyes tight, refusing to give her a single second more of my attention. As we peeled out, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror Victoria, just standing there freezing in the downpour. Beside me, Megumi was practically biting my head off. You're literally bleeding, and they throw you out in the freezing rain. I seriously don't get why you keep going back just to be their punching bag. I kept my gaze locked on the blurred, rainy streets outside. After a long, heavy silence, I finally whispered back. They actually used to be so good to me. Megumi let out a scoff, clearly not buying a single word of it. She'd only met me in college, so she never saw the Victoria and Rachel that I knew, the ones who actually cared. Fighting back the tears burning in my eyes, I looked at her dead serious. I'm serious. They were everything to me. See, as far back as I can remember, my parents were practically ghosts in our house. They poured every ounce of their blood, sweat, and tears into medical research, constantly locking themselves in the lab for 6 months, sometimes even a whole year at a time. So, the ones who actually raised me from the time I was in diapers, besides the nanny who just did it for a paycheck, were my 2 big sisters. They were 8 years older than me, and they were my whole world. I remember when I was just 6 years old, starting 1st grade. The teacher announced this big parent-teacher night for the rookies. But my parents? They were thousands of miles away. I went home, buried myself under my blankets, and cried my little eyes out. Late that night, 14-year-old Victoria snuck into my room, just making sure I hadn't kicked my covers off. When she peeled back the quilt, she found my face totally soaked in tears. She scooped me up, doing her best mom impression as she wiped my cheeks, gently patting my back. Shh, it's okay, she whispered. Big sis is going to go to that meeting for you, Ethan. Mom and Dad might be swamped, but I'll never be too busy for you. and she meant it. The very next day, she totally ditched her own classes just to sit in my tiny first-grade classroom. My teacher completely chewed her out for pulling a stunt like that, and when she finally dragged herself back to middle school, her homeroom teacher made her stand out by the flagpole, roasting in the sun as punishment for an entire afternoon. When the final bell rang and she wasn't waiting at the gate for me, I bolted over to her school in a total panic, only to find her still standing on that concrete platform, baking alive under the blazing sun. I was terrified she was going to drop dead from heat stroke. I ran up to her, bawling my eyes out. She just hopped down, flashing this bright, playful grin to calm me down. "Hey, it's no biggie. The sun feels great. You know I love catching a tan." We grabbed some junk food on the street and walked home under the moonlight. But when we got back, the nanny had already clocked out for the night. It didn't matter, though. Rachel had already cooked up a storm. And the second we opened the door, this amazing smell hit us like a brick. She was bustling around the kitchen, grabbing bowls, poking her head out just to yell at me to go wash my grubby hands for dinner. Even back then, Rachel was the quiet one. Super soft-spoken, but incredibly warm and always paying attention to the little things. Like, whenever I'd eat dirt playing outside and scrape my arms up, I'd sneak into the house, absolutely terrified of getting in trouble. She wouldn't say a word. She'd just roll up my sleeves, gently dab the sting away with iodine, and wrap me up. When she was done, she'd catch me looking all guilty and squirmy. She'd bite her lip, looking like she wanted to scold me. But then she'd just let out this soft little sigh, pat my messy hair and whisper, "Just try to be careful next time, okay?" But man, I was a wild kid. I didn't know how to be careful. So, she'd patch me up time after time, sighing every single time she saw my panicked little face, always asking me to just be good next time. For all those lonely years when our parents were MIA, my sisters stepped up. They weren't just siblings, they were my moms. That was my life, until the year I turned 12. I saw the Northern Lights on TV once, and Victoria instantly promised to take me for New Year's, while Rachel went right ahead and booked flight tickets for the three of us. But then, barely 24 hours later, our entire world shattered. Mom and Dad were gone. Right before the incident, my parents were on the verge of finishing a revolutionary heart medication. They were going to release it dirt cheap to help people, but word got out. The big pharma rivals saw it as a threat, and in the dead of night, some scumbag arsonist torched their entire research lab to the ground. It happened right on the first day of the 12th lunar month. Trying desperately to push this life-saving drug out before New Year's Eve, my parents had pulled an all-nighter in that lab. By the time Victoria, Rachel, and I got the call and rushed to the scene, all that was left were two totally unrecognizable, charred bodies. That nightmare was my absolute final memory of them. It was so traumatic that, even now, I honestly can't even remember what my own parents' faces looked like. Burned alive in that same raging inferno alongside my parents was one of their students, a kind-hearted girl, barely in her early 20s. At the time of the tragedy, her husband was already dead, and her baby boy wasn't even a year old. Even in death, her charred hand still tightly clutched a longevity pendant engraved with her son's name. My sisters, Victoria and Rachel, spent 6 agonizing years searching before they finally tracked that boy down at an orphanage. But fate loves a sick joke. When 7-year-old Leo was brought to our home for the holidays, 6 months later, I was grabbing a bite at a street food stall with some classmates, only to accidentally overhear that same orphanage director crying her eyes out. In a drunken slip of the tongue, she spilled the terrifying truth. The real Leo had died of heart disease at age 3. The Leo living in my house was an imposter, an orphan, suffering from liver failure with absolutely zero money for treatment. Taking pity on him, the director swapped him with the dead boy, knowing my wealthy sisters would foot the massive medical bills. I rushed back home, only to catch this fake Leo breaking my stuff yet again. And this time, it was a precious keepsake from when my parents were still alive. Our framed family photo of the 5 of us lay smashed on the floor. The glass was shattered into pieces, just like he'd done to my things countless times before. The brat squatted down to pick it up, then pitifully held out a tiny scratch on his hand, whining for Victoria to comfort him. Blinded by rage, I stomped over and violently yanked him away, completely losing my mind as I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get the hell out of my house!" For the very first time, Victoria shot me a dark, furious glare, and even the usually gentle Rachel looked at me with pure disgust. "Ethan, Your spoiled, arrogant behavior needs to stop right now." I didn't care. I blurted out everything I'd heard at the stall, watching the sheer panic wash over Leo's face. I naively thought that since his liver failure was already cured, a total imposter had no right to keep leeching off my sisters and stealing my home. He certainly had no right to keep destroying my memories. But all I got in return was Victoria's furious screaming. "Ethan, are you seriously this petty and jealous of a child? He is the son of our parents' most cherished student. He is their only remaining flesh and blood, their final devotion. Does making up these sick lies not eat away at your conscience?" After that day, our home became a total war zone. Just a month ago, Leo pulled his classic stunt again, deliberately smashing the medical research trophy I had just won. I chased the little rat to the top of the stairs, lost all control, and slapped him hard across the face. He tumbled down the steps right on cue. I reached out to grab him, but lost my footing and went tumbling down the heavy wooden stairs right along with him. I severely injured my arm in the fall. As I struggled to drag myself up, before I could even gasp for breath, Victoria marched over and slapped me across the face for the very first time. Even the gentle, quiet Rachel flew into a complete rage, screaming, "Ethan, if you can't live in peace, then get the hell out of this house." They frantically scooped Leo up and rushed him to the hospital, leaving me discarded on the floor, bleeding and injured all the same. The northern lights they once promised to take me to see. 10 whole years had vanished in the blink of an eye, and now they were taking Leo instead. I snapped myself back from the bitter memories. Megumi, driving quietly beside me, gently handed me a tissue. I froze, only belatedly realizing my face was completely soaked with tears. The moment I accepted my mentor's offer to vanish into a 10-year classified research program, I truly believed I had let them all go. But clearly, ripping open those old scars still had the power to break me down and bring tears to my eyes. Hey, it's okay. Take a breath. People always need a little more time to forget and move on. I returned to the university, moved into my cramped dorm room, and threw myself into finishing my master thesis to numb the pain. The very next day, Megumi and I headed to the campus library, only to run smack into Victoria and Rachel. They had brought the golden boy along. Leo probably threw a tantrum wanting to tour the big university library for fun. Victoria was an associate professor here at just 30 years old, so it wasn't weird for her to be casually strolling the library floors. I gritted my teeth, pretended they didn't exist, found a quiet seat, and popped open my laptop to type. But of course, Leo dragged my sisters right over to a table directly beside me. Every few seconds, the obnoxious sound of that brat whispering and giggling drilled into my ears. Victoria clearly felt awkward and tried to shush him a couple of times, but the kid just kept chattering away like he owned the place. Rachel gently patted his head, telling him to be a good boy. Hearing that, my mind flashed back to when we were kids, how she used to sigh and warmly tell me, "Just be good next time, okay?" The air felt impossibly suffocating. I quickly wrapped up the last few paragraphs of my thesis, aggressively clicked save, and stood up. I had to get out of there. I stepped outside to grab some water and clear the rage from my pounding head. But when I walked back inside, my laptop was already clutched in Leo's grubby little hands. Victoria and Rachel had wandered off to browse the shelves, leaving that devil alone to mess with my entire life's work. He was expertly clicking away at the mouse. Pure panic flooded my chest. I lunged forward and ripped the laptop right out of his hands. Instantly, the little snake threw himself onto the floor, putting on the act of a lifetime. He bashed his own forehead against the chair and wailed like a dying banshee. Every single student in the library whipped their heads toward us. My hands were shaking like crazy as I scrambled to dig my thesis out of the recycle bin. But the second I opened it, all the text, all the heavy data charts, 6 grueling months of my blood, sweat, and tears wiped totally clean. The only thing left on the screen was a creepy little text art smiley face, mocking me with its jagged teeth. My brain just flatlined. White noise. Right on cue, Victoria stormed over. Without even bothering to ask what actually happened, she spat, "Ethan, why the hell did you push Leo?" Rachel was already helping Leo up, glaring daggers at me. The crowd around us was getting thicker by the second. Megumi, who had been browsing the nearby shelves, ran over looking absolutely terrified. She took one look at my screen, saw the dead look in my eyes, and instantly connected the dots. "Ethan's thesis. It's completely gone," she gasped. The furious fire in Victoria's eyes instantly died. She stepped closer, staring blankly at my laptop. After what felt like an eternity, her brow furrowed. That's impossible. Leo would never. I didn't even let her finish. I just turned my head toward Megumi, perfectly calm. It was wild. Honestly, I should have been seeing red. I should have lost my absolute mind and torn Leo a new one. Or even thrown a punch, just like I had 100 times before. I should have screamed at Victoria and Rachel for treating this toxic brat like a precious angel. But right then, all I wanted was to get the hell out of there. I had fought tooth and nail with them for 4 long years. Hundreds of battles, and the ending was always the exact same. I was utterly exhausted. I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Besides, in just a few days I'd be leaving this place for good anyway. Tucking the laptop under my arm, I walked straight out of the library. To my surprise, Victoria chased after me. Her voice hit my back icy as always, but shaking with a weird hint of panic. "I'm the advisor for this thesis. I'll give you 1 more week." I didn't even yell. I just softly replied, "Don't bother. I don't have a week left," and I kept walking down the hall. I have no clue what got into Victoria's head. This woman, who hadn't willingly spoken a kind word to me in years, suddenly sprinted up and grabbed my arm. "Ethan, what is going on with you lately?" There was undeniable, raw anxiety cracking her perfect tone. But I didn't even look over my shoulder. I just reached over and gently peeled her fingers off my sleeve. Right as I stepped into the elevator, Rachel marched up and physically blocked the doors. She stared at my laptop, looking totally awkward. "Hand over the computer," she muttered. "Give me a few days, and I'll find a way to recover the files for you." She was a computer science major running her own tech firm. For a split second, a tiny spark of warmth flickered in my dead heart. Honestly, over the last few years, ever since Leo waltzed into our lives, the one who always sparked the massive fights, the one screaming and blaming me was usually Victoria. Rachel was always the quiet, gentle one. We rarely ever clashed. So I just stood there quietly in the elevator, locking eyes with her. Then she opened her mouth again. "Leo is just a kid, Ethan. Even if he did delete it, it wasn't on purpose." Ah, so that was it. She was just terrified I'd hold a grudge and shove her precious Leo down the stairs in a blind rage. And here I actually thought, just for a second, that she had my back. A bitter smirk pulled at my lips as I laughed at my own stupid naivety. I reached out and slammed the close button. That foolish heart of mine, the one that used to cling to them so desperately, was finally going cold. It was turning into a frozen, dead puddle. Not a single ripple left. Funny enough, the sadness was completely gone, too. Right as the heavy metal doors began to slide shut, I whispered, "It's fine. I don't need your help." Rachel frantically reached out, probably trying to pry the doors open again, but she was a second too late. In that final fleeting glimpse, I could have sworn I saw absolute panic and utter helplessness explode in her eyes. But then the elevator closed completely. I chalked it up to my imagination. The next day, after tying up my loose ends on campus, I did one last sweep of my luggage. Around noon, I treated my roommates to a farewell lunch. But the second I stepped out of the diner, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. I hit answer and held it to my ear, but there was just dead silence on the line. I figured it was a pocket dial. I was literally pulling the phone away to hang up when her voice finally cracked through the speaker. "When are you coming home?" I totally froze, genuinely wondering if she had dialed my number by mistake while trying to call Leo. Still, I kept my tone flat. "I've got too much going on at campus, so I won't be back." But Rachel was unnervingly stubborn. "What about tonight?" she pleaded. I had no idea what game she was suddenly playing at, but I threw out a random excuse anyway. "I've got plans with some classmates tonight," I lied. Dead silence hung on the line. It felt like an eternity before her voice finally broke through the quiet. "Today is your big sister's, and my birthday." The words hit me like a truck, and I froze in an instant. For years, I was the only one who gave a damn about their birthdays. I was the one who meticulously planned every single detail, buying the cake, booking the venue, and agonizing over the perfect gifts for over a month in advance. Victoria was always swamped advising her students, and Rachel was an overworked corporate machine who hated loud parties. It was always me dragging them out to celebrate, practically forcing them to fake a surprised smile. But this year, I had genuinely forgotten. My mind went totally blank. After what felt like ages, All I could spit out was a stiff, awkwardly polite apology. More heavy silence filled the air. When Rachel finally spoke again, her voice was weirdly raspy. "Come home for dinner." "I'm cooking." I really didn't want to go. So she quickly added the magic words. "The nanny took Leo to his evening tutoring class. He won't be here." The icy street wind whipped against my face, stinging my skin. Exhausted, I finally caved. Okay. I promised myself this would be my absolute last meal with them. When I walked through the door, Rachel was actually in the kitchen cooking. Outside in the freezing dusk, Victoria was leaning against the iron front gate, smoking a cigarette. Under the flickering streetlight, her pale face was practically turning blue from the bitter cold. For a crazy second, it looked like she had actually been waiting for me. As I walked up, she hacked a couple of times, choking on her own smoke. Having absolutely nothing real to say to her anymore, I dropped some casual small talk. "You know, you could smoke a little less." Victoria didn't say a single word. She just instantly crushed the cigarette out. I stopped dead in my tracks. I never expected her to actually listen to me. Inside, Rachel poked her head out of the kitchen holding bowls and chopsticks. "Wash your hands and eat." Hearing those simple, domestic words, my eyes suddenly stung with hot tears. At the dinner table, Victoria casually brought up a trip to see the northern lights in Norway. It just so happens you'll be on winter break during that time, too. So, we booked an extra flight ticket. You're coming with us. My chopsticks froze midair. Rachel peeled a few shrimp and quietly dropped them into my bowl. She spoke with a bizarre, lingering gentleness. "We promised you a long time ago, Ethan, but your sister and I were just so buried in work. You know how it was." I kept my head bowed down, fighting the tears that threatened to splash right into my food. After all these agonizing years of neglect, they actually remembered me. I choked out a muffled response. "This Saturday, I have an out-of-town trip with Professor Deng. I probably won't make it back in time." Rachel just kept peeling shrimp, the oil staining her perfectly manicured fingers. She didn't miss a beat. "Then we'll leave before Saturday and just come back early. Or we could head somewhere up north, right here in the country to catch the lights." I wanted to scream no, to reject them entirely, but the words died in my throat, because deep down, a pathetic little spark of hope was still burning in my chest, even after all this time. I just couldn't forget that one perfect night. The night Victoria and Rachel originally booked those tickets and swore they'd take me to see the northern lights at the end of the year. Back when Mom and Dad were still alive. Before Leo invaded our home, back when my sisters actually adored me. That was the last truly happy night of my childhood. I could never let go of that promise. It wasn't about desperately wanting to fly to Norway or seeing some glowing colors in the sky. What I really missed was the feeling of being doted on by my family, of actually mattering to them. Rachel wiped her oily hands, pulled out her phone right then and there, and opened a travel app. Without missing a beat, she actually locked in 3 flight tickets to Mohe for the very next day. After confirming the booking, she hesitated, then gently patted my back. "Ethan, Leo is just an outsider when it comes down to it. We will always be your real sisters." Tears instantly blurred my vision, and my hands started shaking uncontrollably. I didn't even dare to look up at them. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, we actually shared a quiet, peaceful family dinner together. For a blissful second, I almost convinced myself that the hellish 4 years since Leo moved in were just a bad dream. Until dinner was almost over, and Victoria ruthlessly shattered the illusion. "Outsiders always have their own hidden agendas, though," she warned sharply. "Take Megumi, for instance. Why do you think she's trying so hard to get close to you? You need to wake up, Ethan. Cut ties with her." My head snapped up in total confusion. Victoria leaned in, her voice dropping lower. "That medical research project Mom and Dad left unfinished? It's being restarted very soon. You should know about this. I personally reviewed the list of participants for the new trial, and Megumi's name is right on it. She's just using you to dig up the research data our parents lost in that fire, hoping you'll slip up so she can steal the credit for herself." I couldn't stomach another second of this garbage. I slammed my chopsticks down and shot to my feet. Senior Megumi isn't the backstabbing user you're making her out to be. The fake warmth plastered on Victoria's face instantly melted into a freezing sneer. "Ethan, watch your tone. I am your oldest sister. Would I ever try to hurt you?" Rachel stood up and gave my shoulder a patronizing pat, though her underlying message was exactly the same. Once you vanish into that classified research program, God only knows how many years you'll be trapped there. Megumi is only going off the grid to steal those medical research results. The second she gets what she wants, she'll drop you and bail. But if you let her drag you down with her, your life will be over. Ethan, remember what happened to Mom and Dad. Megumi is just an outsider. We're only telling you this for your own good. The tiny shred of hope that had just flickered in my chest instantly turned to ice. So this was the real reason they dragged me back home. Without wasting another second, I swatted Rachel's hand off my shoulder. I glared at them, my eyes dead and cold. Senior Megumi has already said goodbye to her family. There is zero chance she abandons ship midway. And even if she did recruit me, it's because she actually respects my skills. In this messed up world, someone has to step up and make real sacrifices. Just like Mom and Dad did, and just like all the heroes before us. What exactly do you mean by unthinkable consequences? I shot back. Victoria's face flushed with absolute rage. You're seriously throwing all this in our faces just to defend Megumi? Ethan, save your self-righteous, high and mighty lectures. I had reached my absolute limit. I grabbed my phone and stormed straight out the front door. Victoria threw a massive tantrum, violently sweeping every bowl and chopstick off the table. The deafening crash of shattering porcelain echoed behind me. I didn't even flinch, marching out of that toxic villa and hailing a cab to escape. Unsurprisingly, Rachel had the nerve to call me the very next morning. She hesitated, playing the victim like she was holding back tears. Leo decided he doesn't want to go to Mohei anymore. He's throwing a fit to visit Norway instead. Right at that moment, a text from Megumi lit up my screen. I have to head down south first. My flight leaves at noon to prep the new research institute. I'll see you when you fly in on Saturday. I stared at the text while Rachel kept rambling in my ear, putting on her fake apologetic voice. Once you finish up your current project with Professor Deng, Victoria and I will totally take you on a trip early next year instead. I let out a heavy breath and replied softly, Fine. Rachel remained silent for an awkwardly long time before randomly asking me, Ethan, how have you been doing lately? What an absolute joke of a question. For the past month, we had literally lived under the same roof. She saw me every single day. Flurries of snow started drifting past my window. The city's first winter storm had arrived unusually late. I forced a hollow reply. I'm doing great. The dead air dragged on. Then I heard Rachel nervously ask, Are you coming home for dinner tonight? Victoria's bossy voice barked through the speaker as well. The housekeeper is back. She whipped up your favorite sticky rice stuffed lotus root for dinner. That was the favorite dish of 12-year-old Ethan. But I was 22 now. I had stopped liking sweets ages ago, and I sure as hell wasn't ever coming back to that house again. Suddenly, Leo let out a pathetic yelp in the background, instantly triggering Victoria into a total panic. Oh my God, I told you to stay out of the kitchen. Let me see where you burned yourself. Click. The line went dead. I listened to the dial tone beep until the screen finally faded to black. The room plunged back into a suffocating, dead silence. I stood frozen by the window for a long time, staring at the swirling snow. Then I unlocked my phone and texted Megumi back. Change of plans. Let's go together right now. I grabbed my packed suitcase and booked a ticket for the very next flight out. I ditched the university and rushed to the airport. As my plane pierced through the clouds, 10,000 meters in the sky, that wretched city finally vanished from my life. Fast forward 3 days after landing down south, it was officially time to enter the top-secret research bunker. Director Sai, the head of the institute, treated our entire squad to a massive farewell lunch. After downing several rounds of drinks, the buzz kicked in. By the end of the meal, more than a few badasses around the table were holding back tears. Director Sai ordered us to make one final phone call to the outside world. He looked at us with dead serious eyes and said, If you're scared or can't bear to leave your families behind, walk away now. This is your last chance. Around me, people whipped out their phones to make their final goodbyes, the room filling with choked-up sobs. I just sat there in numb silence. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and opened my social feed. A bright red notification popped up on my timeline. I clicked it and saw a brand new update posted by Victoria. They had already dragged their precious Leo all the way to Norway. In the uploaded photo, breathtaking neon northern lights painted the night sky. A dazzling splash of brilliant colors spreading across the frozen sky, completely oblivious to the brother they had left behind. The northern lights bled across the snowy sky like a kicked-over paint palette, turning the freezing night into day. Standing right in the middle of it all was Leo, bundled up in a thick white down jacket, a glaringly bright red scarf wrapped snug around his neck. He spun around in the endless stretch of snow, grinning so wide his eyes curved into happy little crescents. But here is the kicker. That bright red scarf? It was mine. Rachel, my older sister, knitted it for me herself when I was just 10 years old. But then Leo moved to the city. The moment he whined about not being used to the cold, Rachel did not even hesitate. She told me to hand my scarf over to him. She promised she would knit me a new one, but 4 long years went by, and she never once brought it up again. Not even a whisper of a replacement. "Ethan, make the call," a voice echoed in my head. "Who knows how many years it will be before you ever get another chance?" I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned completely white. After what felt like an agonizing eternity, I swallowed my pride and dialed the number anyway. But instead of my sister's, Leo's sickeningly cheerful voice chirped from the other end. "Ethan, did you need something?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked, my voice raspy. "Where are they?" Leo's answer was crisp and laced with a sharp edge. "Oh, you mean Big Sis and Second Sis? They told me to pick it up. They said they absolutely do not have time to talk to you. If you have something to say, just tell me." Right then, Victoria's irritated voice drifted through the receiver. "Hang up the damn phone and come over here," she snapped. Leo giggled, putting on his usual playful, innocent act. But he was young, and he just could not completely hide the smug, mocking tone underneath it all. "So, Ethan, what do you actually want? I can pass the message along for you." Hearing that, my pounding heart suddenly quieted down. The last miserable shred of hope I had been clinging to just vanished into thin air. "It is nothing," I answered softly. Without another word, I hit the end call button. Once everyone in my group wrapped up their final calls and finished their last meals, we lined up to enter the top-secret research institute. A single, heavy set of doors stood before us. The moment those doors closed, we would be completely cut off from the outside world. I pulled out my SIM card, snapped it clean in half, and chucked it into the nearest trash can. Stepping through those doors, I didn't look back, not even once. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe in Norway, Victoria suddenly brought up flying back home after barely a week. With New Year's Eve right around the corner, Leo threw an absolute fit. He whined about wanting to stay until the holiday passed before heading back, complaining that there were massive countdown events they just had to see. Victoria instinctively opened her mouth to shoot the bratty idea down. It made no sense. Her university had already gone on winter break, and she had absolutely zero work left to do for the rest of the year. But for some inexplicable reason, she was plagued by this nagging anxiety, a heavy, sinking feeling that they had left something crucial behind by taking this trip abroad. They had only been gone for 7 days, but to her, it felt as if an agonizingly long time had dragged by. She racked her brain for a solid excuse to book a flight home. But before she could even string a lie together, Rachel spoke up in a soft, gentle voice. "It is fun. So, we can always just come back next time. My company still has a lot of urgent matters to take care of, so I really should not delay any longer." Leo, who hadn't gotten his fill of the vacation yet, immediately fired back in a grumpy, discontented tone. "But you just told Ethan a little while ago that you wouldn't be going into the office for New Year's Eve, or the Spring Festival." Rachel froze. The words died in her throat, and a flash of undeniable guilt crossed her face as she awkwardly turned to stare out the window. After a long, suffocating silence, she furrowed her brow and very obviously forced a change of subject. "I have told you a million times. Do not just call him Ethan like that. You should be calling him Big Brother." Leo just scoffed, curled his lips in absolute disdain, threw his brand new stuffed toy onto the floor, and stormed outside. Victoria stared blankly at the little teddy bear abandoned on the floor, suddenly hit by the realization that this was Ethan's absolute favorite kind of toy when he was a kid. What was Ethan actually like when he was little? She murmured. Victoria tried desperately to think back, but to her own shock, her mind just drew a total blank. The only memory that clawed its way to the surface was an image of Ethan screaming, throwing a massive fit, and demanding that Leo get the hell out of their house. Yet as an adult, Ethan had grown terrifyingly quiet and withdrawn, no longer having any interest in talking to her or Rachel. He was always using school as an excuse, saying he was too busy, and he rarely ever came back home anymore. On the rare occasions when Leo broke his things, Ethan would lose control and blow up, only to bottle it all right back up in the blink of an eye, calmly and indifferently saying, "Just forget it." He started preferring life on campus more and more. Whenever Victoria happened to bump into him at school, One second, he would be laughing and joking with his classmates, but the very next second, the moment his eyes met hers, his expression would instantly lock down into a quiet, constrained mask. Victoria slowly bent down and picked the discarded toy off the floor. A terrifying realization washed over her. She felt like she had lost something incredibly precious. But when? When did it start slipping through her fingers? The little brother who used to be willful, who used to cling to them and act totally spoiled. When exactly did he disappear? Rachel's freezing voice suddenly shattered her thoughts. I am flying back home tonight. If Leo hasn't had his fun yet, you can stay behind and babysit him. Victoria's head snapped up. In that split second, she caught a raw, unmistakable flash of panic buried deep in Rachel's eyes. It was the exact same sickening unease chewing away at her own heart. Driven by sheer, blinding urgency, Victoria blurted out, "No way. I am flying back home tonight, too." Rachel didn't say another word, silently packing her bags. They touched down in the city the very next evening. On the ride back into town, for some reason, Victoria couldn't shake a violent, throbbing ache right between her eyebrows. The second they walked through the front door, one thing was glaringly obvious. Ethan was nowhere in sight. Only the nanny came out to greet them. Handing over her coat, Victoria tried to keep her voice totally casual. Has Ethan still not made it home? The nanny just shook her head. Master Ethan hasn't stepped foot in here. Victoria's brow furrowed hard. It had been over a week. Tomorrow was the eve of the Lunar New Year. How in the world was he still not back? Having worked for the family for years, the nanny secretly ached for Ethan, and her voice couldn't hide its icy edge. I have no idea. Before Victoria could even press for details, Leo practically rolled his eyes, hugging her arm to play the spoiled child. Oh, come on. He'll turn up eventually, won't he, sis? Just drop it for now. Come look at this brand new storybook I bought. You promised to read it to me tonight. A sudden wave of utter disgust washed over Victoria. She suddenly remembered how, back in Norway, Leo had openly sneered and called Ethan by his first name. And now? He couldn't care less that Ethan had been missing for days. Just how genuine was this kid who kept sweetly calling her big sister? The nanny spun around and headed back toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath, Miss doesn't give a damn about Master Ethan anyway, so why pretend to ask? That single sentence felt like a poisoned needle, plunging straight into Victoria's chest. Leo pouted, grumbling. He's a grown man. It's not like he's gonna get lost. A sudden, blinding rage ignited out of nowhere. Victoria violently ripped her arm out of his grip, her face turning dead cold as she marched straight up the stairs. Behind her, Leo threw a total tantrum, wailing, Big sister! Did I say something wrong? Are you really not going to read to me? Victoria didn't even bother looking back. She just let out an icy scoff. You're in the 6th grade. Are you still illiterate? Leo's pathetic sobbing echoed through the hall. In the past, Victoria would have immediately spun around, rushing to coddle him the second a tear dropped, giving him absolutely anything he wanted. She always carried this heavy guilt, feeling that if she wasn't the perfect sister to Leo, she'd be failing her late parents, failing the star student they cherished more than life itself. So, for 4 agonizing years, for 4 whole years, she had bent over backward, spoiling him rotten. She poured out every ounce of love she had, desperate to make up for the student who burned alive with her parents in that horrific fire. But wait, how had she treated Ethan? Her actual, flesh-and-blood younger brother? Her heart heavy, Victoria reached the top of the stairs, freezing in front of Ethan's door before slowly pushing it open. It was completely barren. Stepping inside, her stomach dropped. He had completely cleared out almost everything he owned. A suffocating panic instantly wrapped around her throat like invisible, thorny vines, slowly tightening around her neck, choking the very breath out of her. She collapsed onto the sofa, frantically swiping through her phone. Nothing. Not a single missed call. 0 text messages from Ethan. Not even a single post on his social media. Complete radio silence. Why the hell hasn't he come home? Swiping through her contacts like a madwoman, her anxiety peaked. Finally, she broke down and dialed Ethan's mentor, Professor Deng. He picked up almost instantly, the middle-aged professor's steady voice coming through the speaker. Victoria awkwardly beat around the bush, making unbearable small talk, until she finally choked out the real question. Has Ethan been causing you any headaches these past couple of days? On the other end, Professor Deng's voice suddenly shifted, dripping with a terrifyingly heavy undertone. Ethan, How on earth could that boy possibly cause me trouble now? Victoria's temples began to pulse with blinding, agonizing pain. Wait, didn't he go out of town with you for work? He hasn't come back yet, right? A suffocating, dead silence stretched across the line before his voice cracked with pure devastation. Associate Professor White, what kind of sick joke are you playing right now? I brought him with me, sure. But how? How could he possibly ever come back with me? All the strength vanished from Victoria's hands. The phone slipped, smashing violently onto the floor. On the shattered screen, the call timer just kept coldly ticking away. The bedroom plunged into a deafening graveyard silence. You could hear a pin drop. Her brain scrambled. She had to have misheard him, right? What did he mean? How could he possibly come back? Her lungs gasped for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drum. It felt like a fragile, over-tightened string deep inside her brain was being stretched to its absolute breaking point, ready to snap into a million pieces at any given second. Victoria's mind went completely and terrifyingly blank. After what felt like an eternity, her trembling hands picked up the cracked phone. I don't think I understood what you just said. The professor's voice sounded like it was echoing from a million miles away. And right then, that fragile string in her mind finally snapped. Sure, other people might be totally clueless. But Associate Professor White, how could you possibly not know? If you hadn't backed out at the very last second, Ethan never would have taken your spot. Ethan actually told me you gave it all up for that new kid. Leo, is that true? Victoria's face instantly drained of color. Even on this freezing winter day, a thick layer of cold sweat beaded across her forehead. Never in her life had she felt such suffocating terror. The phone in her hand suddenly felt like a burning coal. She scrambled to hang up, practically shaking, but her fingers were completely numb. Those words like some twisted curse just kept looping violently in her mind. Other people might be clueless. But how could you not know? Wasn't it because you backed out that the spot opened up for Leo? No, 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 that wasn't it. Her name had been on that participant list from the start. Her last-minute choice to drop out was simply because she couldn't stand the thought of leaving Ethan behind. With their parents gone, she was terrified that if she left, Rachel wouldn't be able to properly take care of her baby brother. It was exactly like Ethan used to say. In this harsh world, someone always has to step up and make the ultimate sacrifice, just like their parents did. So, she had made up her mind. Yet, as departure day crept closer, she just couldn't sever those family ties. She couldn't bring herself to walk away. It had absolutely nothing to do with Leo. How could it possibly be about him? Wait, did Ethan actually think she gave up her future for Leo? Was that the reason he decided to take her place in a hellish 10-year exile? How could that be true? How could he do this to himself? Massive drops of cold sweat rolled down her face. Her entire body felt like it was roasting in a blazing inferno, while simultaneously plunging into an icy abyss. Victoria gasped desperately for air, her lungs burning as she edged dangerously close to suffocating. Impossible. This is impossible. On the other end of the line, Professor Dung sounded genuinely confused. Associate Professor White, there is no way you're actually in the dark about this, right? Right before Ethan entered the research institute, he made one final call to you. Drowning in a suffocating wave of pure terror, despair, and crushing guilt, Victoria desperately clawed back a single shred of sanity. She instantly fired back. No! He never contacted me. Look, we've been siblings for over 20 years. Sure, we've drifted apart and yeah, maybe he resents me. But before vanishing into a 10-year classified black hole, he absolutely would have said goodbye. So he definitely didn't go. The professor's voice cut through the phone with brutal certainty. That's completely impossible. We were in the private dining room. When I stood up, I watched him dial your exact number with my own 2 eyes. It was right around noon, last Saturday. Victoria opened her mouth to deny it again, but then, like a violent lightning strike, a horrifying memory flashed in her mind. Noon, last Saturday. Back then, it was roughly 5 a.m. in Norway. At 5 in the morning, she had just taken Leo out to see the northern lights. The kid had begged to take a million photos, goofing off excitedly until almost dawn before heading back to the hotel. On the walk back, Leo had grabbed her phone, whining that he wanted to check out their pictures. He was staring at the screen as he walked, and in the blink of an eye, he had left her trailing behind him. Victoria had paused, turned around, and caught him pressing her phone directly to his ear. She assumed he was just listening to a video they'd recorded. She had even yelled at him impatiently, "Turn that thing off and get over here!" A sickening, twisted realization crashed over her like a tidal wave, instantly flooding her lungs and choking the life out of her. Oh my God. Was Leo actually looking at photos back then? Or did he intercept Ethan's final goodbye? The line went dead. Professor Deng had hung up. Suddenly, her closed bedroom door was violently shoved open. Victoria's head snapped up. For the very first time in her life, she prayed with everything she had that it was Ethan walking through that door. Just like a million times before, coming home late at night after a long day at school. She wouldn't care if he totally ignored her. She wouldn't care if he glared at her with that freezing contempt. Or even if he wrecked the whole house. She'd forgive him for trying to chase Leo away. She'd even forgive him for supposedly pushing that little monster down the stairs. She suddenly realized she would give up absolutely anything, just to have her real brother back. If he just came home, everything would be okay. But as the door slammed open, a biting winter chill swept into the room. It wasn't Ethan. It was her sister, Rachel, with terrifying, bloodshot eyes. She was completely covered in blood from her head to her toes. God only knows what fresh hell she had just crawled out of. After their flight landed, Rachel had hopped straight into a cab and vanished, refusing to ride back home with Victoria and Leo. Victoria hadn't had a single clue where her sister had run off to. But now, this usually sweet and level-headed woman looked like a grim reaper. Without saying a single word, Rachel stormed straight through the bedroom, headed dead set for the bathroom. Stepping back out into the hallway, she tore through the other bedrooms and the study. Victoria knew exactly what she was desperately looking for. But soon, Victoria collapsed onto the bed, her legs completely drained of strength. Meanwhile, Rachel frantically finished scouring every inch of the upstairs and downstairs before rushing back. She stopped dead in her tracks, looming right in front of Victoria. Victoria stared at Rachel's ghostly, pale face. When she finally spoke, her voice and entire body were violently shaking. "Ethan is gone." Victoria just opened her mouth, suffocating on the words, only managing to choke out a sound after an agonizingly long silence. As if desperately trying to comfort herself, she muttered the same words Leo had told her. He'll always come back eventually. A grown man like him won't just get lost." But Rachel's eyes flashed crimson, a thick layer of tears welling up in her furious glare. She shot her hands out, trembling uncontrollably, and violently hoisted Victoria up by the collar. "He left with Megumi. I just checked the campus security cameras. He packed his bags and walked right out of here with Megumi." Rachel's voice shook harder and harder, completely losing control. She twisted Victoria's collar so tight it nearly cut off her air supply completely. "Did you hear me? He left with her. Do you even know what Megumi is about to do? Did she know?" Her chest burned, gasping for air. Yet Victoria was too stunned to even flinch. Beneath that crushing wave of panic and absolute despair, there was nothing left but an endless, pitch-black void of realization. How could she possibly not know what Megumi was up to? The roster for the top-secret 10-year medical research program. As an associate professor and department mentor, Victoria herself had personally reviewed and approved that very list alongside the senior faculty at the institute. Megumi was on it. And just a few days ago, starting last Saturday, the project had officially launched. It went without saying exactly where Megumi was heading. Stumbling to her feet, Victoria drifted out the door like a wandering ghost. "I'll go find him. I'll go tell him to come back home. Tomorrow is Little New Year. He stays home with us every single year for the holidays." Rachel's face twitched in disgust, her voice dripping with sheer agony. "Why the hell did you have to listen to Leo? Why did we have to go to Norway? We promised we'd go to Mohe. Ethan actually agreed to go to Mohe. If we had just gone there, he might not have had the heart to abandon us." Victoria didn't say a single word. She slowly walked toward the bedroom door as Rachel's agonizing screams echoed through the halls behind her. "Cut the crap, Victoria! How long has it actually been since you gave a damn about Ethan?" Victoria froze right in her tracks. Her limbs felt like they were cast in lead. After an eternity, she finally turned her head, staring blankly into Rachel's eyes. "And what about you? Did you care about him?" The raw fury, hatred, and sorrow plastered across Rachel's face completely shattered, freezing instantly. She slowly sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands as her shoulders shook uncontrollably. "We really are exactly the same. Neither of us is innocent, and neither of us gets to escape the blame." Outside, heavy snow had been pounding the city for days on end. By midnight, a massive blanket of frost buried the streets. Victoria didn't even grab her winter coat before rushing out into the bitter cold to track down Professor Deng. But when she found him, Professor Deng's voice sounded incredibly helpless. "Victoria, I'm really not trying to hide him from you. For a classified operation like this, apart from the assigned staff, absolutely no one will know the exact coordinates of the lab. Even I only dropped Ethan and the team off at the southern city to share one final meal together. Once they boarded the transport to the institute, I lost all security clearance to follow them. And honestly, the actual facility almost certainly isn't even in the southern city." Victoria stared blankly, her voice dry and raspy. "There has to be a way. I'll figure something out. I'll find a loophole. I know I can track him down somehow." Professor Deng let out a heavy sigh. "Forgive me for being blunt, but years ago, your parents were killed in that accident precisely because their project details were leaked to the public. A single breach in confidentiality gave those criminals the exact opening they needed to strike. Until this 10-year project ends, no outsider will ever find them." Victoria looked like her soul had been completely ripped out, but she fired back with stubborn grit. "I will absolutely find a way." Professor Deng couldn't help but drop a harsh dose of reality on her. If you kick up a massive storm trying to hunt Ethan down, you're just going to put a target on his back. Associate Professor White, don't you dare forget what happened to your parents. If you actually give a damn about Ethan, respect his choice. Victoria's pupils shrank, trembling violently in sheer horror. The midnight blizzard turned the sprawling city into a glittering silver wasteland, and in that moment, it felt like her blood had completely frozen over. She stood rooted in the snow, stripped of even the strength to twitch her fingertips. Ethan was gone, and now she couldn't even risk trying to find him. Professor Deng turned around, walked back into his yard, and slammed the door shut. Left out in the biting cold and endless snow, Victoria was finally, utterly alone. No. Wait. There was one more. She slowly turned around, only to see Rachel standing silently beneath the dead tree right behind her. Their eyes locked, and right there under the freezing streetlights, they saw the exact same thing reflecting back at them. Absolute, shattered hope. Victoria's mind instantly flashed back to a massive snowstorm many years ago. It was the day their parents suddenly passed away. 12-year-old Ethan had cried in the freezing snow until he could barely breathe. She remembered holding him tight, whispering, "As long as your big sister is here, Ethan, you'll always have a home." But she had broken that promise. Now, Victoria didn't even dare to go back home. She honestly had no idea where else to go, either. She drove aimlessly through the dark streets until, as if guided by fate, she ended up at the orphanage on the edge of town. It suddenly hit her the growing distance. The endless arguments with Ethan, it all started the exact moment she brought Leo home from this very place. If she could just turn back time. If they had never brought Leo home, what would their lives be like right now? Her head was spinning with regret, but then something caught her eye. Bathed in the pale glow of the moon and streetlights, two figures stood right outside the orphanage gates. One tall, one short. Even in the dim lighting, it was impossible to miss. The shorter one was Leo. Victoria sat there, completely paralyzed. She hadn't even turned on her headlights when she pulled up. Because of that, the two figures had absolutely no idea she was watching them. Pulled by some invisible force, Victoria parked the car and crept closer in dead silence. She actually managed to get mere feet away. If they had just turned their heads, they would have spotted her lurking in the shadows. But they were way too deep into a heated, vicious argument. Neither of them even bothered to look around. And right then, for the very first time, Victoria heard 11-year-old Leo speak with a downright sinister, venomous tone. "You seriously think if you just go tell them, 'Oh, I'm not the real Leo,' they're actually going to believe you? Why the hell should I listen to you? Go back once my illness is cured? Yeah, right. They've raised me for 4 years. They already treat me like their actual little brother. They don't give a damn about Ethan anymore. That absolute clown called last week. I picked up, and I could hear it in his pathetic voice. He is never coming back. From now on, I'm their one and only little brother. Who cares if they share blood? Over the last few years, do you have any idea how much of his stuff I've completely trashed? And those two older sisters? They only ever took my side. Once I faked being pushed by him. The idiot actually tried to catch me, ended up hurting himself, and even got slapped right across the face for it. He totally deserved it. He was begging to go to MOA, so I purposely threw a fit to go to Norway. And guess what? They took me to Norway anyway. In the future, everything belongs to me. Every last thing is mine. He sounded so insanely proud, bragging like these twisted games were his greatest achievements. As Leo ranted, his eyes burned with sick, ecstatic victory. His face contorted into a horrific, twisted sneer that didn't belong on a kid his age, and their back-and-forth argument kept dragging on. Victoria wanted to charge out of the shadows. She wanted to rip him apart, to tear him into 1,000 pieces, but she was completely frozen. Even if she killed the monster standing in front of her, would her Ethan ever come back? Could she rewrite what had already happened? No, she couldn't. It was too late. It was far, far too late. Countless memories started flashing violently in her mind like a broken projector. The first time Ethan screamed for Leo to get the hell out, desperately trying to expose the fake. The first time Ethan's precious photo frame was smashed. The first time he broke down, wailing in absolute agony. The first time Ethan covered his face, silently choking back his own tears. The moments when he felt the most cornered and helpless. The time Ethan supposedly fell down those stairs. And that first brutal slap she delivered right across his face. Every single, horrific detail had just paved the road for him to leave them forever. Never in her entire life did it hit Victoria harder than in this exact moment. She had completely lost Ethan. He was gone, and he was never coming back. Victoria honestly didn't even know how she made it back to the house. When she pushed the front door open, she found Rachel slumped lifelessly on the sofa. The nanny was sitting right across from her, her face freezing cold and detached. It's not like I'm just bringing this up out of nowhere. Which one of these things did Master Ethan not try to tell you about before? Rachel just stared back blankly. There was absolutely nothing left in her eyes but a hollow, broken glaze. She must have found out the exact same sick truth Victoria just did. The nanny's voice trembled with heavy grief. I've taken care of you girls for years. I always believed that even though Ethan used to throw the occasional tantrum, he always knew where to draw the line. He would never lie about something this serious. Deep down, the sisters used to believe that exact same thing. So why? Why was it that the second Leo walked into their lives, they completely stopped believing their own brother? Rachel stumbled to her feet, dragging herself up the stairs like a ghost. Victoria shadowed her, watching quietly as Rachel drifted into the bedroom, popped open her suitcase, and pulled out a vibrant red scarf. Rachel's pale lips trembled, whispering frantic words that only she could hear. I promised him. When he comes home, I have to give this back to him. Victoria choked out, her voice raw and grating. He's not coming back, Rachel. Rachel's lips quivered as the dam finally broke. Tears streamed down her face for the very first time, soaking silently into the crimson fabric. Her sobs were so violent that her words just melted into broken gasps. She was right. He wasn't coming back. As for me, by the time I finally walked out of that research institute, 12 long years had slipped by. Our drug development was a massive triumph. The targeted medication for heart failure was fully approved, finally hitting the market at a price ordinary people could actually afford. I attended the press conference, standing proudly alongside my mentors and the rest of the research team. That day was absolutely incredible. Crowds of heart failure patients and their families showed up completely unannounced. They were bawling their eyes out, totally overwhelmed with gratitude. It also just so happened to be the first day of the 12th lunar month, the exact same day my parents had died in the line of duty. It felt like time was looping back on itself, finally rewriting their tragic ending. My mind drifted back to a night from years ago. I remembered my mom holding me close, whispering gently, "If our research just goes a little faster, these patients might actually afford their meds before New Year's Eve. They could finally celebrate in peace." Back then, I was just a kid. I only grasped half of what she meant, totally blind to the burning passion and the heavy tears welling up in her eyes. She told me so softly, "There are way too many people in this world who just give up on living, all because they're too broke to afford outrageous drug prices. For every single dollar, we can shave off that price tag. Maybe one more patient will find the hope to keep fighting. Ethan, this is what your dad and I are living for." But then they were taken from me, dying way too young, taking their unfulfilled dreams right to the grave. But now, I had finally finished the very last step they couldn't. I just hoped that, wherever they were now, they could finally rest in peace. I took the bouquets of flowers from the patients and smiled for the swarm of reporters shoving mics in my face. But right in the middle of all that chaos, My eyes locked onto a chillingly familiar gaze. Through the crushing ocean of people, I spotted Victoria standing way off in the distance, with Rachel right beside her. After 12 whole years of zero contact, they were visibly aging. Doing the math in my head, they were both well into their 40s now. Deep crow's feet carved the corners of Rachel's eyes, and she just looked utterly battered by life. And Victoria? At barely 42 years old, her temples were already frosted with gray. As our eyes met, time stood still. For a split second, it honestly felt like an entire lifetime had flashed right by. My mind briefly flashed to the big sister who used to skip her own classes just to make it to my parent-teacher conferences, the second sister who would stand on a tiny stool just to cook me dinner and stew soup, and the little boy I used to be, just a brat who loved causing trouble. Now, we were all just getting old. I saw the corners of their mouths twitch. They were desperately trying to smile at me, but they looked like they were 1 second away from totally breaking down. They just stood there, staring at me from afar, but they didn't dare take a single step closer. So, I just offered a polite smile back. There was nothing left in my heart anymore, just pure, absolute calm. 12 years didn't magically erase all the toxic resentment and hatred, but it gave me the space to finally let it all go. Once the press conference wrapped up, I headed out with my mentors and the rest of the crew. Just as we were walking away from the venue, a woman's raspy, panicked voice suddenly cut through the air. "Ethan! Man, how long had it been since I heard them call me by my actual name?" I honestly couldn't even remember. Seeing the tension, my colleagues tactfully walked ahead. Megumi gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Ethan, I'll wait for you out by the car." I nodded and turned around, watching Victoria and Rachel scramble toward me in a desperate panic. But once they were just 2 steps away, they froze. They didn't dare cross that final gap, stopping dead in their tracks. I just looked at them. The silence stretched on forever. Finally, Victoria choked out in that agonizingly rough voice. "After all these years, have you been doing okay?" I replied with a completely calm tone. "I've been doing great." Rachel tried so hard to hold it together, but her eyes were practically screaming with absolute agony. "About Leo, we know the whole truth now. Ethan, your big sister is so sorry." But my heart didn't skip a single beat. Keeping my voice totally steady, I simply said, "It's fine. It's all in the past now." Victoria's face completely crumbled. After what felt like an eternity, she asked in a trembling whisper, "Could we maybe get a meal together?" I slowly shook my head. Probably not. In a flash, that tiny spark of hope in their eyes completely died out into darkness. I didn't stick around for the fallout. I just turned my back and walked away. From somewhere behind me, Victoria's broken, raspy voice echoed through the hall once again. "I'm sorry." My steps paused for a brief second, but in the end, I walked right out of that venue without ever looking back. I headed back to the city to visit my old mentor, Professor Deng. I hadn't seen him in 12 years, and his head was already completely gray. I just sat there, listening quietly as he told me all about Victoria and Rachel's massive breakdowns and their endless remorse. During the 12 years I was gone, Rachel spiraled into total despair. She landed in the emergency room dozens of times because of heavy drinking. Victoria, drowning in her own years of sorrow, threw herself into countless medical experiments and grueling research projects at the Institute. Pulling constant all-nighters and working herself to the bone caused her health to absolutely tank, too. And as for Leo, he got kicked right out of the family. Since he was so used to a life of sheer luxury, he stubbornly refused to ever go back to the orphanage. Eventually, he started running with a rough crowd of delinquents. They took him out street racing on motorcycles, which ended in a horrific crash. He barely made it out alive, totally wrecking his leg and suffering severe brain damage. Right now, nobody even knows where he wandered off to. He became a mentally impaired drifter on the streets, and honestly, no one knows if he's dead or alive anymore. Hearing all of this tragedy unfold, my heart just felt completely empty and at peace. When he finally finished talking, Professor Deng let out a long, heavy sigh. "They've realized their terrible mistakes for years now, Ethan, and they regret it all so deeply. Have you ever even thought about forgiving them?" I gently cut off my mentor right there. I don't even think about it anymore. To me, that whole life is in the past. For the rest of my days, I'm just going to pour everything I have into pharmaceutical research. And as for my 2 older sisters, I can't even say that I hate them anymore. But there is no way I'm ever turning back. I ended up marrying Megumi when I was 37 years old. Since we were a bit older, we decided to adopt a beautiful newborn daughter. When my little girl turned 3, I threw a huge birthday party for her. Once the party wrapped up, I was outside seeing off the last few guests. Just before I could head back inside the house, I spotted Victoria and Rachel standing out there in the dark shadows under a distant tree. I was 40 years old now, and they were creeping right up on 50. Victoria was actually sitting in a wheelchair. Genuinely caught off guard by that, I couldn't help but take a second look. It looked like they had been standing out in the cold for hours, way too terrified to actually step inside. The moment they noticed me looking, a desperate flicker of hope lit up their eyes. Rachel instantly pushed the wheelchair, rushing frantically toward me. Only then did I realize they were both clutching things tightly in their hands. Rachel nervously held out a small gift box. "This is a present for your daughter. I really hope she likes it." Her voice was trembling, filled with unmistakable humility and sheer panic. I stood there in a daze for a second, but ultimately, I reached out and took the box. Victoria's tired eyes immediately lit up, and she quickly offered the bouquet of flowers she was holding. "It's been such a long time. I completely forgot to say congratulations to you." I honestly had no clue what she was even congratulating me for, whether it was finishing my 10-year drug research, my recent marriage, or my daughter. I didn't bother asking, though. I just reached out and took the flowers, keeping my voice polite but ice cold as I replied, "Thank you." Rachel was also gripping a crumpled shopping bag. With violently shaking hands, she pulled out a bright red, hand-knitted scarf and held it out to me. She couldn't even bring herself to look me in the eye. "I'm so sorry. I've owed you this for a very long time." A sudden memory hit me. I remembered being back in that dimly lit bedroom as a kid, watching Rachel stay up all night by the window, desperately trying to knit me a scarf. And all of that was just because I had seen a classmate bragging about a custom scarf his mom had made him. My own mother never had the time for me, and Victoria was way too careless for something like that. Since she was terrible at crafting, Rachel had actually sneaked off to a guy who had gifted her a scarf, practically begging him to teach her how to knit. Back then, it was never just a scarf to me. But right now, a single scarf couldn't even begin to fix what they broke. Even so, I flashed a hollow smile and didn't reject the gift. By the end of it, my arms were completely full of their guilt offerings. Finally, they turned around and walked away into the night. I turned back toward my house, walked right up to the front yard entrance, bent down, and quietly dumped every single item onto the cold ground outside my door. My older sisters had never given me this much attention or this many gifts in my entire life, but it was too late. I didn't want any of it anymore. Just as I dropped the last item, I accidentally glanced over my shoulder only to see Victoria and Rachel. They hadn't gone far at all, and they were stopped dead in their tracks, staring right at me. They saw their precious gifts thrown out like literal garbage, and with overwhelming sorrow, they panicked and quickly looked away. Later that exact night, I got a frantic phone call from the hospital. They told me Victoria was on her deathbed, practically begging to know if I wanted to see her one last time. In the end, against all my better judgment, I rushed straight to that hospital anyway, because after all these years, Victoria had poured her entire heart and soul into medical research, giving it her absolute all. As a dedicated mentor and researcher, even though she hadn't even hit 50 yet, her body was already completely ravaged by countless illnesses. I stepped into the sterile hospital room and sat quietly beside her bed, suddenly remembering how, just yesterday at my daughter's birthday party, she pushed through the agonizing pain to come see me in a wheelchair. That had to be her final goodbye. Rachel sat on the other side of the room. Nearly 50 herself, she buried her face in her hands, choking on heavy, uncontrollable sobs. I looked back down at Victoria. Her fragile body was tangled up in a mess of tubes, with life support monitors beeping softly in the background and an oxygen mask hiding her face. She forced her mouth open with agonizing effort, and even though no sound came out, after decades of being brother and sister, I instantly recognized the familiar shape of her lips. She was calling my name, over and over again. It was urgent, yet so incredibly weak. "Ethan. Ethan." I was instantly thrown back to that freezing snowstorm from years ago, remembering a much younger Victoria, not even 20 at the time, holding me tightly in her trembling arms. "As long as your big sister is here, Ethan, you will always have a home." Flashing back to those old memories felt like waking from some bittersweet dream. Right before my eyes, her face faded to an ashen gray. Her breathing grew more and more shallow, and she reached her trembling hand out, desperate to touch me, burning through the very last drops of her strength. In the end, I reached out and gently wrapped my hands around hers, whispering softly, "Hey, once you make it to the other side, promise me you'll finally get a good rest." I watched as warm tears slid down from the corners of her eyes. It felt like she had 1,000 unspoken things left to tell me, but in the end, it all just melted down into a breathless, endless loop of my name. Ethan. Ethan. I watched her slowly close her eyes for the last time as the heart rate monitor flattened into a long, deafening beep. Stepping out of the hospital, I realized it was snowing heavily again. Megumi was waiting for me outside in the bitter cold, having wrapped up the final paperwork, and was just getting ready to step into the car. But something in my chest tugged at me. I turned around, only to find Rachel standing just a few paces behind me. White streaks were beginning to show in her hair, too. Her face looked so completely worn down by the heavy toll of life. Drifting snowflakes gently landed on her hair and shoulders. Staring through the freezing wind, I called out to her, "Take really good care of yourself from now on." Her raw, tired eyes, which had barely stopped crying, instantly welled up and turned a deep crimson all over again. She opened her mouth to speak, but a lifetime of words just choked down into two simple ones. "You too." I opened my car door and climbed inside. As we drove away, I watched her lonely, slightly hunched silhouette slowly fade out of sight in the rearview mirror. Thick snow piled up against the glass, blurring everything around me. And in a sudden, quiet daze, I could see our old home shining brightly once again. It was a snowy New Year's Eve. All 5 of us were huddled around a steaming hot pot, sharing an amazing holiday dinner. Mom held up the glasses, while Dad poured the wine. Under the warm, cozy lights of the dining room, 5 glasses cheerfully clinked together, ringing out over our family's joyful laughter and blessings. Now that we've had our perfect New Year's dinner, may every single year ahead bring us back together in joy and happiness. Ha! T-A-N-D